Okay, all right. So, here we go, folks. Last video, last last thing. We've made it almost. We've almost looks like we made it. We're almost here. We're almost there. Wait, I don't know. We're almost done with the semester. And we've done well. If you're still here, then well, congratulations. I know this has been tough for many of you because you signed up for a class with people talking to each other and doing, hey, how's it going? Hello. Okay, go away. Yes, I love you. Go away. Okay. Anyway, it's my dog, Augustus. I don't know if you can see him in the shot. Anyway, but I know that you guys all signed up for an in-person class, and that's what I love to do. I love to see your faces. I love to hear your questions, and I love to, I love to chat with you about stuff that really means a lot to me. History does mean a lot to me, and I told you guys that when we first met so many months ago. Unfortunately, life is how it is. Sometimes you get thrown a curveball, and this was a major curveball. So for the past 5 weeks, we've been doing this thing, this online talk through a camera thing. And, for some people it works, other people it doesn't. It is what it is, but we've made it, folks. And so I want to give you congratulations. And yes, you're so adorable. I want to give you congratulations for sticking with it. I know it's tough having to, change horses in mid-race, doing that. But it is what it is. And this is the last official a week when it comes to actually learning, because next week is our test. Okay, so take a look at the email that I sent out. Your study guide, I've had to revamp it, and I've had to revamp the test and take things out and put things in because of this whole online thing. So I'm working on it. I promise I'm working on it as diligently as I can, and I'm hoping to get you guys the study guide by tomorrow or Thursday at the latest. I put in the email maybe Friday, but I'm making good headway on it, and so I want to get it out to you. I want to make sure that stuff is in there that you actually need to learn, and hopefully you have learned based off of the lectures if you've been watching them. If you haven't been watching the lectures, well, you've got many hours of watching me coming up if you want to hope to get a passing grade on that test, okay? So make sure that you're watching the lectures. Remember, when it comes to the test, same rules kind of apply. You may use your notes and everything else. You're on your honor not to look things up or look in your book, but you can use all the notes from all the stuff that we've been writing down and listening and learning about, okay? What else? Remember the test. So unlike the test in the class, this one is timed. It's the only way I can do it to keep you guys, on the straight and narrow path of honesty. Okay. So it's going to be timed, and it will be next week. Now, as for the stuff before that, your both your paper and the presentation that you've done are due tomorrow. So Wednesday. This is, today's Tuesday, right? Yes, today's Tuesday. So it is due tomorrow, Wednesday, by 11:59 p.m., okay? Something that's really cool, and I sent out an email, is that I got in touch with the IT department up at WNC, and they showed me how you guys can upload your video files directly into one of those modules, and I've opened that module, the last one for you, week 15. It's up there. And so, because some of you contacted me, hey, how do you want me to submit this video? And I just had thought that you could just submit it as an attachment or send me the link to via email, Canvas email. But I think this one will be easier. It'll be uploaded through the Studio platform in Canvas. So do that. If it doesn't work, still, you can send it via Canvas email as well, okay? But make sure that you do get that presentation done, folks. Make sure that you do get that paper done, okay? Because it is worth a ton of points. You can't pass the class if you don't turn those things in, okay? And I know that you guys have been, doing so well, and you're just overwhelmed. That's how college goes. You guys are in the last 2 weeks of college, and you're slammed with all of your final papers and projects and presentations and all that other stuff and all your classes. But you can do it, and I have all faith that I'm going to see a bunch of amazing presentations and read a bunch of amazing papers. Okay, that's all going to be happening. So the paper and presentation is coming up in a couple days. Wednesday, not a couple days, but tomorrow, and then the test is next Thursday. Okay, the test is next Thursday, and I'm going to send you an email with how to get into it and what the password is and all that good stuff. Okay. But here we go. It's time to do our last talk, our last lecture. I'm sad because, like I said, I love talking about this, and you're the only people I get to talk to it about. And so now I'm gonna have to sit here and just, I don't know, talk to myself about it. And yeah, so. All right, folks, so let's get going. Your guiding question is, how did the ideas of the Renaissance effectively end the Middle Ages and push towards the creation of modern Europe? Okay, we have reached the end of the class, like I said, and this class begins in ancient times, right? The beginnings of civilization, which we talked about so long ago, so many weeks ago, and it goes all the way up to the year 1648, and I will explain why that date is significant. Okay. So we have covered a couple thousand years, well, thousands of years of human history, and that has switched over into European history. And so how did the ideas of the Renaissances would finish up with effectively end the Middle Ages and push towards the creation of modern Europe? Because anything after 1648 is, well, I mean, people can push it back even earlier. Some people say the Renaissance is an example of modern Europe in comparison to like the Romans or the Greeks. But I guess it just depends on when you consider, what is modern, okay? But a lot of people do consider 1648 the beginning of modern Europe, even though it was, over 300 years ago. What finally culminates in the year 1648 that we can say, oh, this is starting to look like a modern society. And we've seen so much of how this European society changed, right? How it became modern, right? Remember, modern doesn't always equate to good, or it does equate to advancements, obviously, right? Technology, we've seen that technology gets better, but more importantly, ideas and thought patterns change. Okay, it's not just about hold on, let me let my dog out. It's not just about advancements in how we kill each other, which obviously we talked about that too. But the advancements in thoughts and ideas, the way that civilization was with the Romans, it wouldn't fly in a modern age, and that's a good thing. But we had to get a start from somewhere, and so we do owe a lot of our modern society to these seeds that were planted a very, very long time ago. Okay, all right, let's get going. So we were talking about the Renaissance, okay, and thank you very much. All right, so we're talking about the Renaissance last week, and now, yes, I see you. Go away. Come on, you're being a pest. Get out of here. Makes me lose my whole train of thought, dog. Okay, and the Renaissance. So the Renaissance is effectively the ending of the Middle Ages. Okay, those Middle Ages were split into three different parts, right? The early Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, the High Middle Ages. When we think of like with kings and queens and knights and all that stuff, and then the Late Middle Ages, the time period where Europe is starting to coalesce into what we see on the map today. There's France and England and Spain and even Germany and places like that. Excuse me, not Germany. I always do that. But England, France, these other places. Okay, and then the Renaissance is taking what was good in the Middle Ages and all the stuff that was good, that was great, and then we had all the disasters of the Black Death and the Great Famine and all these other things, the 100 Years' War. But time marches on, and so do people. People pick themselves up, the ones that survive, and they just keep moving on, and they get better, and they get better, and they get better, and that's what we have. So we ended up on the Renaissance last week, and we focused on this topic here, this idea of the Renaissance. The Renaissance is split into not split, but the foundations of the Renaissance can be geared towards these two terms here, okay? We talked about this one last week, the patronage system. The patronage system, remember, the Renaissance starts in earnest in northern Italy, in the city-states of northern Italy, effectively around the end of the 1300s, beginning of the 1400s. And we talked about the patronage system. Remember, the patronage system was a system. It wasn't like it was developed. It just kind of happened. It had been around to a certain degree since the Roman times, right? Remember, if you're a part of the senatorial class, the patrician class, right? You're not a pleb down at the bottom. You're running for office, and you want votes of influential people. So what are you going to do? You're going to patronize the city. You're going to provide things to the city to basically as a billboard to get your name out there. This fountain, this water fountain, was provided free of charge by Publius Varius Romanus or whatever, right? And his name's all over it, and it's free. He's had it built for the citizens of that town or whatever. Basically as almost a bribe to get their vote. The patronage system is a little bit different in the Renaissance. Renaissance patronage has to do with the great families. Remember the great northern Italian families like the Sforzas and the Medicis and the Borgias and the Gonzagas and all these great Italian families who came up during the 1300s and really started becoming movers and shakers of European society by the 1400s. And how did they make their money? Well, remember, with banks, with the banking system, and with trade, okay? They carved out little mini empires for themselves in the city-states like Florence and Siena, Modena, and Milan, and those places. And they became the end-all be-all in those cities. The patronage system did many things in the Renaissance, during the Renaissance. It helped create all the beautiful works of art, the amazing architecture, the written masterpieces that we see from the Renaissance were all due to the patronage system. Someone in a position of power with money and authority and clout tells somebody else, an artist, a sculptor, whoever it might be, a Renaissance man, I want you to do this. I want you to do it for many different reasons. One reason is because, there's new ideas flourishing around, and we want to see your interpretation of those ideas. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more here with humanism. But we want to see your ideas out there in the open, okay? So how can you transform these ideas of the Renaissance into something incredible, like a sculpture or a painting, whatever it might be, transitioning away from the Middle Ages, okay? The patronage system is, once again, a way for these great families to effectively tell everybody, I'm in charge, my family's in charge. There's other families here, and they might have money too, but I am the family to be in this city, whichever city that might be. And so, most of this stuff has been generously donated by me to the city, to the people, in effect, letting I'm in charge, and I'm the person you have to listen to. Okay. The other the other aspect of patronage in the Renaissance it focuses just on the beautification of the city. Okay, like we talked about. The Middle Ages, when you see the rise of the city itself, just in general, not a city-state, but the rise of the city, they grow very quickly because, tons of people are flooding into them. And as we talked about, they're cramped, they're dirty, they stink, they're rife with diseases. It's not a good place to be when you're, surrounded by the enemy because you're stuck in there, you're starving. There's certain sections where you can't go. Because either that's where the rich people are, or that's where like a certain minority is being cloistered. But they're just these kind of cesspits. If there's a natural disaster like fire, it's going to affect everybody. But the patronage system helps beautify the city as much as it can be. And I'm not saying that if you went back to Florence in the year 1500 that it would be smelling like roses and it'd be perfect. Far from it. To our standards, it would still be pretty disgusting and pretty terrible. But they were getting there. They were getting better at it. And the patronage system helped make these these cities a little bit more livable, and they beautified them with almost like bringing, Rome, the expansion and creation of Rome back, into this modern society, right, in Renaissance Europe, okay? And so there we go. And now we're going to move on to the second concept that is the second half of the foundation of the Renaissance, and that is the term humanism, okay? Humanism. Humanism, the best way to understand this word and understand this concept is to look at the first word in the word itself. So humanism has the word human in it, okay? Humanism is not the study of man, okay? That's, anthropology. But humanism, when it comes to the Renaissance, is, take a look at this guy here. All right, this guy. Who the heck is this guy? Well, he's holding a book, so I'm guessing that he's not, some great warrior. And he wasn't. He was a scholar. And this guy is considered he's been called like the father of the Renaissance or the father of humanism. It's tough to put something that specific on a person because it's like, well, so wait, this thing wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for this one person. It would have happened, but there are certain people in history that their influence on that whatever it is are so great. Their influences are so great that they earn those sobriquets. That he is the father of humanism. So who is this person? This person's name is. Hopefully you've written down this question by now, but you have it in your notes anyway. This guy's name is Francesco Petrarca, or as he was known by and as he's known by now as Petrarch, okay? So when you're really fancy, you get to be known by just one name, Petrarch. Petrarch was an Italian humanist. He was a scholar, obviously. He was a writer. He was a thinker. He was a poet, okay? He was a lot of things. He was skilled in many languages. He spoke the vernacular Italian at the time in the 1300s. He spoke Latin. He also spoke Greek as well. He dabbled even in a little bit of Arabic too. He was he was a genius scholar, a genius intellect, okay? And his focus was on, like I said, humanism. And humanism, in a nutshell, is the study of God and man's equilibrium when it comes to the Renaissance, okay? So what I mean by that is, remember, since the time of the church coming up with Constantine, when there's still the Roman Empire, and it eventually transforms into the Catholic Church, but it's just the Christianity way back then. Over that 1,000 years, the focus of the church, of the Catholic Church, and it has been the focus of European society up to this point in history, for 1,000 years, is that God is supreme, right? God is the supreme being. Without God, there'd be nothing. Without God, there would be, no sun, no stars, no earth, and especially no people. And it took God creating those things for them to appear, okay? So for 1,000 years, the church is teaching European society that. And remember, it's not just that God is supreme. It is also that since we, the Catholic Church, and the church in general, remember, it's the only church, since we are God's anointed ones on earth, especially the Pope, we are the spiritual leaders for you, ordained by God. We are also almost all powerful, okay? I don't want you to get confused and think that church leaders were running around saying they were at the same level as God back then. They certainly weren't, because that would have been heretical. However, many of the popes and many of the people in the church did have some of those feelings that, yes, there's God in heaven, but down here on earth, I'm basically it. You can ask God's forgiveness, but I'm the one who has to actually give it to you. Okay, and so we've seen for over 1,000 years that the church's hold on European society is all-encompassing, right? That the church has its footprint in everything, in every aspect of European life. Okay, when we get to the Renaissance, things have changed. Remember, in the Middle Ages, people are coming back from these new places, and we see development, remember, of that S word, scholasticism, okay, done by like scholars, theologians, and scholars like St. Thomas Aquinas. And they were trying to rationalize faith. Remember, in a nutshell, they're trying to rationalize faith. They were basically telling us, we've deduced every possible iteration of God and believing in God, and we have shown you through reasoning and logic that faith exists, that God exists, because there would be because to not believe in God would be irrational. Okay, so remember, scholasticism, and we'll just wrap up with that really quick, is the melding faith with logic, right? So feeling with thinking. Okay, trying to put it together. And for a long time, that's how it was. The idea was that, not only should you believe in God because it's the right thing to do and it makes you feel better, but you should believe in God because, even looking at these ancient peoples, these ancient Greeks and Romans, looking at their works, have proven we've proven the existence of God by using logic. And so it would be ridiculous for you not to believe in God, okay? But when we get to the Renaissance, things start to change. And why is that? It is because of this concept of humanism, okay? It doesn't just change overnight. Remember, ideas and how societies are built take time. It's generational, okay? One group of people think one way, and then it might take a long time for, even their grandchildren to think a different way. But change does happen. Change is inevitable. That's how it's always been throughout history. Change happens. The way that the newest generation believes might be 90% the same as what their parents thought, or 85% the same as what their grandparents thought. But there's still that 5 to 10% difference. I'm just tossing out some numbers there just to improve a point, that they're thinking differently. And the same thing happens with European society during the Renaissance. So we see a shifting away from scholasticism to this idea of humanism. Humanism is the idea that God is all powerful, but what is the greatest gift that God has ever bestowed? Is it the sun? No, because the sun is, it's up there, but they didn't really understand what it was. Is it is the moon? Nah, it's there. It's beautiful to look at. Is it the stars? Well, no, we just see these kind of twinkling lights up there. You've got to think about think the way a person in the year 1400 might be thinking. What is the greatest gift of God? The greatest gift of God is man, is us, is humans, is people, okay? That he created all this stuff, that God created all this stuff, the heavens and the earth, and he did everything. But at the very end, he saved his best creation for last. And that was the creation of man, the creation of people, okay? Because a Renaissance humanist, and eventually most people, are thinking to themselves, they're not comparing themselves to like a bird or even a majestic horse. Those are beautiful animals, a beautiful peacock with beautiful plumage, or an Arabian stallion that can run so fast. It's a beautiful animal, but it's less than a human. The idea is that even the basest human, the most rotten individual, or the most ugly person, or the person with the greatest defects, still a human. It's still the pinnacle of God's creation, that God saved all the best for last. Humanism is the focus on the relationship between God and man. But instead of trying to prove faith with logic and reasoning like the scholastics did, 200 years before, humanists believe there's still God, absolutely. Like Petrarch, devout Catholic, absolutely believed in God, okay? There's still God, and God is still superior. God is, Heavenly Father. But now our focus should be on us, man. And it's not, they don't consider it hubris, prideful, like we're so great. No. The humanists believe that you take everything that we've done in our past, because remember, now they're looking at these ancient texts that have now come out, they're starting to circulate amongst scholars like him. They're not out in the general public, but they're amongst scholars like him, or Erasmus further north in the Netherlands. And they're saying humans are the pinnacle of God's achievement, that humans are the thing, that is God's greatest creation. Let's focus on man to see what we can do, okay? Instead of just attributing everything to God and saying, God did this and God did that, and all of a sudden you're saying, let's see what this amazing gift can do. Let's see what these humans can do. And the Renaissance proves that humans can do a great many masterful things. But it's all in coordination with the belief in God, and that by showing how great man is, you're not showing that man is higher than God, you're showing the greatness of God. Okay, does that make sense? You're showing the greatness of God by showing that God could make something so amazing, and that is mankind, humans, okay? And by going and taking this old information, thinking about this old information, and coming up with new ideas, whether it's with writing or architecture or sculpture or painting or poetry or whatever it might be, you are showing that man's limitations are small in comparison to the rest of the world, okay? So for instance, like somebody like Da Vinci, since from time when he was a little boy, was obsessed with and enamored with flight. Absolutely loved it. Even, we have hundreds of his sketches, but we even have his sketches when he was a child. And even when he was a child, he was drawing pictures of birds' wings, and because he was obsessed with it. And he knew, he wasn't obviously a dumb person, he knew that eventually humans would, and he tried to work this out because he tried to make it happen in his time, but he knew at some point that, this is not going to happen for me. But eventually humans will figure this out. And sure enough, they did. I think he'd be pretty amazed to see how far humans had come, since the time that he passed away. I'll be right back. I've got a window open and my sun in my face. All right. So, where were we? Make sure I don't forget anything. Okay. Humanism is the Renaissance thinkers wanting, the Renaissance doer, thinker, builder, whatever, to show the glory of God through the creations of his greatest creation, and that is man. Okay? When a person exhibits, creates something incredible, okay? So, for instance, let's take a look at this. Typical example of a late medieval painting. What do we have here? We have the Virgin Mary and Jesus, okay? You don't have to be an art historian to understand, okay, I'm not an artist. I couldn't even draw this, okay? But in comparison to a Renaissance painter, this is, well, it's beautiful considering its age, right? That this is over 600 years old, and that somebody 600 years ago with their rudimentary supplies were able to create something like this. And you can understand what it is, obviously. Here's Madonna, and here's her child, Jesus. But look at it from a humanistic perspective. It's off, right? It doesn't look right. You know, look at Jesus. We can't tell Jesus' age in this picture, can you? I mean, it's almost like he's a baby, but then it's almost like he's a little man, okay? Look at the fingers of the Virgin Mary. If I see fingers that long on a regular person, I'm kind of weirded out. They just seem off. Look at the Virgin Mary. Her countenance, her face is almost, well, like concerned, okay? But there's not really much emotion there. Look at Jesus. It's just a face, okay? But then if I, fast forward, a couple hundred years, here we have the same idea being done in the Renaissance. And how is this different, folks? This is Raphael, okay? This is Raphael. Here's a medieval painting compared to this one. It's showing the same thing. The Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus. Now take a look at this. Obviously it's stylistically done to focus on what people would have liked in the 1500s in comparison to 2020. But compare this, to this, right? There's no real movement here. There's no motion to this. It's just an icon, okay? It's a representation. Here's the Virgin, here's the child. But then we look at this. It looks like two real human beings interacting with one another. It looks like the Virgin Mary. It looks like a young girl, okay? A young woman. This is not the face of some 52-year-old lady. This is a young woman. And what is she doing? She's gazing with joy and inspiration and love at her baby. And it looks like a baby. The baby Jesus looks like a baby. It looks like, a toddler, whatever. What is the baby doing? Well, take a look at the medieval one. This baby is holding something and then also doing something I've never really seen babies do. Okay? Doing the sign of the 3 points of Jesus. I've never really seen, my daughter didn't do that when she was a toddler. But once again, I don't know if this is a older man or if this is a toddler or who the heck it is, okay? But then we look here, what's this baby doing? He's doing what baby's doing. He's kind of just hanging out. He reaches forward. He's grasping the bodice of his mother, okay? What are her hands doing? Her right hand gently clasps him on the back, protecting him, holding him there so he doesn't roll off, right? But then her left hand is held up towards her heart, right? It's almost like she's overcome with emotion. It's almost like she's like, you know what? I can't believe this. He's perfect in every way. What every mother feels for their baby, okay? But Raphael, why he's a genius, why these people were geniuses, is look at this. It's so delicate. Not just the colors, and that's another thing too. Look at here. Drab, right? This dark blue. We have browns in the back, almost yellows. Some kind of, umber color, right? And yes, it's much older, okay? But look at this. You can see how her hair is braided, right? You can see that diaphanousness of her veil. Of her veil, everything else, okay? This is humanism in painting form. This is the Renaissance, folks, okay? So going back, here we go. This is Donatello's version of David. He has slain the giant Goliath, whose head lies down at his feet. He's a warrior. Okay, this is not a biblical, or excuse me, this is a biblical story. But what is the focus on? Is the focus on God? Is there like some kind of, thing of Jesus? No, it's on the human form. And we see during the Renaissance that humanism and that focus on the human form is the greatest thing to show, okay? Now, how were these guys doing it? For the first time, they were studying how humans, the actual body, is, and they were learning this from the ancients and from their own ideas and from their own focus and their own experiments and everything else. Now, they had to be careful. Like, for instance, Leonardo snuck into the morgue and he would pay off the guys to let him dissect the bodies, okay? And he couldn't do that. The church told him not to do that because the body was, it had to stay in its original form, okay? Had to stay in its original form. But they did it anyway, and they learned how the body was. So take a look at this. Looks like a youth. Looks like a young man. Doesn't look like an old man. Looks like a youth. Okay? Got the body of a young man. Same thing. When we zoom up on the face, it looks like a human form. It looks like a human face. You see a definitive nose and mouth and cheekbone structure and eyes, even though it's all cast in bronze. And then it's really a pupilless face. It still looks like emotion. It still looks like a young man who is maybe considering what has happened, right? He has just slain this giant beast of a man, okay? In comparison, like I said, to this, really no facial expression, okay? The Renaissance, folks, is the focus on humanity. Not rejecting God, but the focus on how do humans play into all this? And what is the limit? Is there a limit for God's greatest creation, us? Okay? Same thing. When you walk into the Vatican, right, in Rome, right when you turn to the right, here is this masterpiece, right? Michelangelo, the Pieta, okay? He cast this when he was 26 years old. I don't even want to tell you what I was doing when I was 26 years old, but it wasn't making masterpieces out of marble, okay? Once again, incredible detail, okay? All done out of stone, out of rock. You can see the folds in her dress. You can see where his chest is, where the muscle systems are along his rib cage, on his stomach, right here, how his neck flexes out in his death. Look at her hand, how you can see the imprints of where her fingertips are pushing into his body. And most importantly, look at her face. Once again, he was able to carve emotion, okay, from stone, from an inanimate object. He's able to animate the object because people like Michelangelo, like Donatello, Raphael, and all the other Ninja Turtles were masters at this. They were able to take the form of the human. They were able to take the ideas of the Renaissance, this newness, this understanding the old and creating something new with it to create something new, okay? We see in that old painting by Raphael, in that first painting by Raphael, love. In this one, we see heartbreak. We see tragedy. She's holding the body of her son after he's been taken down from the cross. She's not like crying. He didn't carve, tears coming down her face, but you can still see that. Okay? And then probably his most well-known statue is his interpretation of David. Once again, the idea is he's not encased in armor. He's not covered up from head to toe. The idea is to show his youthfulness, okay? His youthfulness, and to show the form of man. This is impeccable, folks. This is extraordinary. There's not enough adjectives to describe how just it's genius level work that has been done. You can see the topography, right? The raised portions where the vein structure is. where you see the folds of the skin. Look at the musculature here. Everything else. Look at his neck. It's perfect. There's not one flaw. See that? David in this looks like he's, this one, there is a pupil. He's staring off into, I don't know, into uncertainty, into the future, okay? He doesn't know that he'll end up being the king of his people. At this point, he's just a young man who's killed Goliath, okay? Moving on a little bit later on, we have Selene. This one isn't even a biblical story. This is Perseus. I don't know how many of you know the story about Perseus, but whose head did he chop off? The head of one of the Gorgons, right? Medusa. Why did he chop off her head? Because he had to go save his girlfriend Andromeda from the Kraken. Okay? The only way to defeat the Kraken was to petrify it with stone by showing the head of Medusa. Okay? So once again, folks, this isn't a biblical story. This is based off of Greek mythology. Okay? But the idea is still the same. You're showing the human form. Whoops. Showing the human form. Okay? This is also based on the patronage system too. Who paid for him to do this? The Medici, right? The Medici. Basically saying it's a billboard, it's a political statement saying, I am your Perseus to the people, right? I am your Perseus, the Medici. I will save you from the Kraken. I will save you from the problems that affect all of us, okay? And Selene is doing this. He's being paid to do this. Okay, folks, so moving on. The foundation of the Renaissance can really be put towards these two concepts, okay? Patronage system and humanism, all right? So remember, humanistic thought, humanists believed in the progress of man, okay? They believed that by learning from the old, we could craft something new. And they were right. Okay, they were right. And it was an absolute rejection, that old scholastic thought, right? The old scholasticism thought, trying to prove faith with reason. They're basically telling us they're two different things. It's oil and water, like I mentioned last week. It's oil and water. They can be mixed, but you can never use one to prove the other one. It's silliness. You have faith, or you don't, and you have logic and reason, or you don't. Okay? But they're not polar opposites. They can be put together, okay? So once again, the Renaissance is not some like great atheistic push, towards, God is dead or something like that, and now it's all about humans. Not at all. It's how do we show the greatness of God by showing the greatness of humanity, greatness of us, of people, okay? All right, moving on. What is this machine? This machine is, in my opinion, and I'm always right, so it's your opinion too, is the greatest invention ever, okay? And there's been a lot of great inventions, okay? Airplanes, cars, Egos, okay? Been a lot of great inventions. But this one, in my opinion, blows them all away, because this one, in my opinion, is, if the Renaissance is a time from the dying of the old world and the beginning of the new world, this is its main tool for doing that. And what the heck is this? This is a printing press, folks. This old-fashioned printing press. It's very, very simplistic in its form and function. Okay, it's very, very simplistic in its form and function, but its ability to do what it needed to do, and its change, how it changed society, is, well, we're still dealing with the ramifications that even now, even 600 years almost after it was done, okay? So, remember, we talked about how to, by the time we get to the mid-1400s, there's books around, obviously. There's been books around for a long time. But how were they made? Remember, you usually had, some old priest, monk, whatever, sitting there for years and years transcribing a book, right? Doing beautiful copies of it, very beautiful copies. But that takes what? A long time. It takes so long to do a book, especially if it's a couple hundred pages long, to sit there and transcribe it. If you screw up, well, you've got to tear out that page and start over again, and that might be 2 months of work down the drain, okay? And paper's not cheap and it's not found at Walmart. Okay, but the printing press changes all that. Okay, the printing press changes all that. And who's the person that comes up with it? Okay, now the printing press, the idea of the printing press, I should say, was not specifically invented by this person, okay? But we give credit to him because of the things that he did come up with and how he made the printing press far superior than it was, okay? So the printing press. Okay, printing press, as we know it, the printing press in the West was largely, the idea was put into practice by a guy. He was a German, and his name was Johannes Gutenberg. Okay, Johannes or John Gutenberg. Okay, he was a goldsmith by trade, so he was, he worked with gold. He would make, jewelry and things like that, and strangely enough, it wasn't very lucrative, okay, because there weren't too many people running around buying his jewelry. However, he started toying with the idea of creating this making a printing press better. There have been some out there, but he wanted to make it better. And so what he did was he went to Italy and he studied how he went to the vineyards. This is crazy. He went to the vineyards. And what's at a vineyard? A bunch of grapes, right? Grapevines and everything else. And they had kind of something like this. So basically, you gather the grapes, you stick them in it. The easiest way to do it, but not very effective, is you just dump a bunch of grapes into a big barrel. And they usually would get two women, and two women would stand in the barrel and they would just stomp on the grapes. There's a screen down there and they would smash the grapes, and they would do that all day long. And the women's feet and legs would be permanently dyed, purple. And then, the juice would come through, and but all the other stuff would come through too. The seeds and little pieces, of the grape skin and everything else. So it wasn't very practical. They'd have to sift that all out. Well, they started making these presses, okay, where they would put a big flat thing of wood on top of the grapes and push it down. Well, they realized that, even though they're grapes, if you have 4 million grapes pushing back up at you, they didn't understand this concept. We had to wait till we get to Isaac Newton for that. But, force and energy, it's pushing back against them. It's not working. But if they put it in a machine, even a rudimentary machine, which is wood, and you use the machine's power, it squeezed all the juice out of the grapes. Well, he looked at that and he said, why don't I do that, but turn it into a printing press, okay? So basically, his whole printing press thing is, here you have that, the press itself, okay? You have a little slide that comes out here. You put down your paper, okay? Put down your sheets of paper. You take your ink daubers, coat them in ink. You cover up your letters with the ink. You stick them on there. You stick another piece of wood on top of the letters. You slide it all underneath here. Person stands there. They push it. It smashes the letters down into the paper, right? Soaks up the ink. You hold it there for a second. Take it, pull it out, and you've got yourself a beautifully printed piece of paper. Okay. Now, what did Gutenberg do? He did not come up with movable type. And here's an example of movable type. Okay. He did not come up with movable type. That was actually done further east with the Chinese, but he made it better, okay, by separating the letters, and you could take different letters, okay. He also worked on creating a better ink. Ink before this time was really water-based, so it was runny and it would just slide off the paper. His was chock full of metals because he was a goldsmith, so much so that his ink almost glittered because it had so many metals in it. But he added oil to his, it was oil-based ink, so it stuck better to everything and it dried much quicker. His printing press was much easier to assemble. Okay, so he used his first printing press in the year 1440, and unfortunately for him, it did not translate to the millions of dollars that he hoped it would. But what he didn't reckon, and that did happen, was that it created a revolution. A revolution in what, folks? A revolution in learning, okay? For the first time now, books become what? More widespread. Now, take a look at this. This is a medieval book, right? Late Middle Ages. Incredibly beautiful. We see that God is being resurrected. Okay, that's what this is showing here. God is being, Jesus is being resurrected. Jesus is being resurrected, taken up to heaven. And then this is the talking about it. Okay, sapientia veritas divina Deus homo capi, everything else. Okay, beautiful. But look, the actual writing part is very minuscule compared to the illumination. Very beautiful, but very impractical. Okay, the printing press allows. Here's an example of a print shop. The printing press allows stuff like this. Look how quickly that can be done in comparison to that last one. That last one, that one page probably took a couple months, if that, okay? This one can be printed in 20 minutes. Move on to the next page, 20 more minutes. So you get an entire book done, doesn't matter. It could be 200 pages long, 100 pages long. You get a whole book done in a week. That's incredible. And what happens when there's more books available? What happens to the price of books? Remember, if I took you back to the year 900 and we found a book, it would be invaluable. Nobody'd be able to afford it. It would be in the hands of the church usually, okay? And nobody wanted it because it meant nothing to them. They were illiterate. But all of a sudden, if I have a ton of books floating around, what happens to their price? Just like now. You gotta have a lot of stuff, the price goes down because people aren't willing to pay as much. If there's only a few of something, the price skyrockets. But now all of a sudden, books start getting printed all over the place, okay? The first printing houses, like I said, he was in Germany, but then they spread to Northern Italy, and then from there, they go crazy all over the place, okay? Within 100 years, there's hundreds of printing presses all throughout Western and Central Europe. Not Eastern Europe for the most part, but Western and Central Europe. Okay, so this is an incredible invention, folks. For the first time in history, information can now be widespread. Okay, now how does that affect a peasant who's illiterate? Well, those first peasants, not really much. It's still just a book. It's still something that means nothing to them. They don't care about the information in it. They can't even read the information that's in it. Okay. But over time, right, like we talked about, this is a process over time. They start seeing books. Pretty soon their grandchildren are used to seeing books all over the place. And what have their grandchildren even done in comparison to their grandparents? They've learned how to read to a degree. The peasants, right, the serfs have been illiterate for hundreds and hundreds of years. There was literally no reason for them to learn how to read and write. What was the point when you're just gonna be out working on the fields? But now all of a sudden, with this new change in society, people are learning, okay? People are learning, all right? So take a look at this. Here's another thing too. Can you read this? Well, it's pretty tough and it's in Latin, so I guess you could try. There's certain words in there that we see like Deus and Veritas. But if you don't know how to read Latin, if you're just some regular person, you can look at the picture and be like, oh yeah, he's talking about Jesus, but I don't really know much else about it. Okay, but now look at this. I can read this. And did this person who printed this write this book? No. Take a look at the author, folks. Look at Aristotle. Last time I checked, by the time this book was printed, Aristotle had been dead for over 1,000 years, a long time. It's Aristotle's knowledge about having a baby. So for the people who still can't read, we have pictures there. There's the woman giving birth. She's surrounded by her midwives. Here's the baby that she's just given birth to. And what is this talking about? It says right there, Aristotle's Complete and Experienced Midwife in 2 parts. This is a guide for childbearing women in the time of their conception, bearing, and suckling of their children. Proper and safe remedies for the curing of distempers and everything else. A work far more perfect for midwives, everything else, made in English by, right? The 7th edition. So the 7th time this has been printed this way, okay? That is incredible, folks. That is incredible because remember, if you're a regular person living in Paris in the year 1450 or, I don't know, Florence, you're not running around quoting Latin to each other. You're not talking about Latin. You're speaking in your vernacular. You're speaking to the person next to you in the language that you know. Well, if they start printing books in the language that you know, pretty soon you start what? Learning. You start knowing. You start understanding. So all of a sudden, knowledge is not just in the realm of the learned or the church or the nobles who got taught. It's now being more readily made available to everyone, okay? There's still no compulsory school or anything like that. You're not going to school from, kindergarten to 12th grade, not at all. But you're starting to learn a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. People are starting to learn a little bit more, okay? All right. Here we go. Another religious text, okay? Obviously we can see. Here we go. Virgin Mary, Mary Magdalene, people looking at Jesus as he's being crucified, okay? Once again, it's in Latin. But what's amazing about this is for the first time in history, this was all originally carved by somebody. It was carved on a piece of wood, okay? It's all carved on a piece of wood. Then they carved using metal. They carved the same picture into the metal, okay? And then you can ink this up and you can use this and reuse it and reuse the same picture, right? Over and over again with that movable type. See? It works with pictures as well too. Okay? If you have certain inks, you can even do that too. So take a look. Everything in red, see, except for the beginnings of these statements, are come from Jesus talking. Okay, to separate them from the rest of whatever else. But folks, the invention and the bettering of the printing press in the 1440s, okay, is incredible, okay? It goes hand in hand with the Renaissance. And I would postulate that without the printing press, the Renaissance, its ideas and how much of an incredible impact it was on society would not have gotten as started as quickly, that we could have pushed back the Renaissance maybe even 100 years than where we have it at, the 14 and 1500s, okay? But what can you do when you actually have learning? When you actually have available books? You can do everything, folks. You can study anything that you want, okay? Because what group, organization do you think challenges this when it starts happening? As more and more printing shops start popping up all over Western Europe? Which group? If you said the Catholic Church, you'd be correct. Because why would the Catholic Church be not so on board with this? Well, for many reasons. But the biggest reason of all is that by allowing people to have their own ability to think for themselves and allowing people to focus on how they want to learn about God and about Jesus and everything else, you suddenly are what? You're taking out the middleman, okay? You're taking out the middleman. The middleman in this case is the church, because for 1,000 years, remember, the church has been telling everybody there's only one way to heaven, and that's through us. We're the ones that can give you all the information. We're the ones who can tell you the do's and don'ts. We're the ones that will give you guidance. Well, what happens if I can just grab a Bible and I can read it on my own and interpret it on my own? They're worried about that, and justifiably so, because all of a sudden you're allowing people this new idea that's creeping up in the Renaissance, and that is free thought, the ability to rationalize and think for yourself, okay? But it spreads into anything, it doesn't matter. One of the greatest, offhand really quick, the first book that Gutenberg printed was the Bible. Okay. If I can remember, I think he produced about 26 of them, and they're not just little like regular Bible size. They were huge, like tomes. They're huge, okay, huge. I saw one at the Smithsonian in DC. It was an incredible piece of craftsmanship. The sides are all bound in gold. It's fantastic. Incredible, just a priceless piece of artwork. That's really what it is, not just a book, not just, a Bible. Incredible piece of artwork. But he made like 26 of them, and there's a few that are still floating around that are still in existence, 600 years later. But do you know what were the most common types of books at the time? It was not Bibles. No, it wasn't Bibles. What books do you think got printed the most? You'll never guess. You'll never guess. It wasn't autobiographies. That was, that was big. But the most widely spread books that were printed the most and that most people bought, and this shows you how Europe was changing, were actually travel logs. Not brochures, but travel books, okay? Interestingly enough. But it shows you how European society was starting to move around. That it was, yes, you had France and England, but it wasn't anymore where you just had, one person stuck in one spot for their whole lives. Now people were out moving around in the world. And what they needed were books about the place they were going to. So if you had never left London, and you were all of a sudden sent on a business trip to Antwerp by your guild or something like that, well, you went and bought a book that was now nicely printed, that was able to be printed in a couple weeks as opposed to 15 years, and it told you all about Antwerp. It told you the best places to eat, it told you the places to stay away from, it told you the best brothels to go to, it told you about some traditions and stuff that they might have, or things that you could do. It even had little travel phrases in there. It's pretty amazing. It seems like such a modern idea, but those were not the first books, but the most widely published books in the 15th century anyway. But one of the most important books that gets printed, we'll talk about this really quickly, is this one, and this is the frontispiece of this book. This one was done by, this guy here. He was a Dutch humanist, but more importantly, he was an anatomist, and he published this book, and like I said, I don't think he could have done this had he just been writing it, but he got this book published and is widely disseminated, and this book is called De Humani Corpus Fabricus, which means on the fabric of the human body, okay? For the first time in history, an anatomist, a doctor, was opening up the human body and studying it from the inside out. Dead people, folks, not live people. They weren't slicing open live people. And not only that, he was saying, oh, look at this. I cut open this body, and the rib cage looks like that. And I cut open this other body, and wow, the rib cage looks like that. Well, I cut open this other body, and this one's of a woman. Yeah, she's got a rib cage. It might look a little smaller, but it's still a rib cage. And what did he do? He did what we take for granted now. It's like a diagram. You can see, it's hard to see from here, from where you guys are, but there's little letters here, basically showing this is this bone, this is this bone, this is this bone. And I can show you 1,000 bodies. That's what he's showing in the thing. And it's the same thing. Here he is too. So here he is. He's pulled apart, this body, and he's showing, right, not just the bones, but look, the muscle system, the musculature, the tendons, everything else. It's incredible, okay? Same thing, look, here's the muscle system. This is from 450 years ago, folks. You can easily see what's happening in this, and this is 450-year-old book, okay? This was not published, 20 years ago. That's pretty darn good. Look at them. Look, he's done everything. We see the muscle systems. He's labeled them. Okay, that's amazing. That's incredible. And he's got it. And he's got that. Can you imagine if he sat there and he drew all those paintings, drew all those drawings, all those diagrams, and did all of his, his writing? He might have gotten one book done in his lifetime. But instead, using the wonders of the modern printing press, he was able to print thousands of these books. And other people just like him were able to print thousands of their books on whatever they were studying or talking about. Sometimes people just wanted, cheap entertainment. Here's a story, some dirty story about, the barman and the girl next door. Just some dirty stories too, because people are people. That's how people have always been, okay? You read to learn, you read for entertainment, you read to, whatever, be scared, you read to laugh, you read the Bible to, get more in touch with your faith, whatever it might be. The printing press makes this happen, folks. The printing press is the baby, the offspring of the Renaissance, but it helps the Renaissance flourish even more, okay? It helps the Renaissance flourish even more. These ideas, once they're out of the box, folks, once they've been opened up, you can't just stick these ideas back in. And trust me, the Catholic Church tries and tries and tries, but eventually they realize it's a hopeless losing battle. You might be able to stop one person from thinking for themselves, but you can't stop an entire kingdom or, whatever, a group of people, okay, when they start thinking for themselves, okay? Once again, this doesn't create a whole generation of atheists. Not like all of a sudden people go, I don't believe in God anymore. But they do start to question what they're being told, and they start to question who's telling them. And that is, obviously, the focus is on the church, okay? Oh, here you go. Travelogue. So here we have Venice, right? We've got the skyline of Venice in the 1500s. So got some information talking about Venice here, but here you go. Once again, what's amazing is that I've seen these books when I've looked at them, gone to these collections and I've looked at them. Oftentimes you're like, wait, I think I've seen that skyline before. And you got to think about when this book, I've looked at books that were, printed like in, 1480. And you're like, wait, this one's talking about this city of Cologne, Germany, but then this one is talking about this city of, Nuremberg, Germany. And you look at the pictures and they look the same because the printing press or the printer, had that one cut, the one movable type of this city skyline, and he just used it for every single one, okay? Unless there was something dramatic, like you couldn't do that with Venice because obviously people are like, that's not Venice. But eventually people learn, okay? But they get used over and over again, okay? Oh, gosh. All right, what's going on? All right, folks. So moving on. All right. I'm gonna try and put this all into one video, okay? By the time we get to the Renaissance, and we get to the late 1400s and we start getting into the 1500s, okay? So the 16th century, we start to see, we've seen it before, but they've always been able to fix it. We start to see larger fissures or cracks appear in the church, in the power of the church, okay? Things are happening at breakneck speed in the Renaissance. We've left the horribleness of, the end of the Middle Ages behind, and, life is still very rough in the Renaissance, but in comparison to 200 years before, it probably seems like a walk in the park to many of these people. And the cracks are starting to appear, okay? The cracks are really starting, and unfortunately for the church, these cracks, instead of just filling them in really quickly and then, moving the problems down the way like you would with a road, these cracks are bigger, and they're caused by them. And for the first time, like we talked about, people are starting to challenge the idea of the supremacy of the church, okay? They're not challenging the idea of God. Some are. They're, wait, does God exist? Should I believe in him? Of course. The vast majority of people are still good Christians, God-fearing Christians. They still believe in Christ. They still believe in everything the church is telling them. But they're starting to take a very closer look, and they're starting to scrutinize the aspects of the church itself, okay, of this institution, of this organization. And what they start seeing starts a lot of people, especially people in power, like these, kings and emperors and things like that, to grumble. Now, they've been grumbling for a long time. We've talked about that, right? The two swords theory, and who's in charge? Is it the king or is it the pope? Who gets to appoint these, church people? Is it the king or the pope? Where the taxes go to? They've been fighting about that for hundreds of years. But by the time we get to the 1500s, a lot more people, because of these newfound ideas and these newfound ways of thinking, are starting to put pressure on the church, basically saying, well, hold on a second. You've held us up to, you've expected people to be up to this, aspect of their lives. They're supposed to hold these certain regards, but you maybe don't practice what you preach. Okay, we saw some reform in the early Middle Ages. Remember the reform of Cluny? That a lot of these problems. It's not like they just all of a sudden popped up in the Renaissance. They've been going on for a long time. They tried to fix a little bit of them, but they've continued on, and that's what we get to now. Whenever the church had to deal with problems, especially heretics, we talked about that. They would try and bring the person back into the faith. They would try and show the person that they're wrong, and try, and then if they didn't, then eventually that person was usually consigned to the flames, right? Get rid of the problem if you can't fix the problem, okay? By the time we get to the year 1500, the Catholic Church is once again this bureaucratic leviathan of epic proportions. The Pope still controls the Papal States, okay? The Pope still controls the Papal States. He has basically his own army of mercenaries. He still is in the middle of politics all throughout Europe. And there's lawyers running around everywhere, and there's accountants running around everywhere. And the church is a far cry in the year 1500 from, when it was first starting out and becoming the church in the year 300 under, Constantine the Great. Excuse me. They have so many people in the church now, like at high levels, that they literally cover the continent. From Spain to Germany, from Germany to Scotland, from Scotland to the Baltic states. They're just there's church officials everywhere, okay, and they hold themselves separate, okay. They're not under jurisdiction usually of the king. They are in this jurisdiction of this one man in Rome, the Pope, okay. The church, as we saw, controls huge swaths of land throughout all these kingdoms, right? Here's this giant parcel of land, and it's controlled by the church officials there, and all the money and everything is generated. Well, once again, it goes to the Pope in Rome, okay? And the kings and everything hated that. We talked about that. Corruption at all levels in the church, from the very bottom, from the church, from village priests all the way up to the top, the Pope, was widespread. That doesn't mean that every church official was some corrupt, awful person. Not at all. The majority of them were God-fearing, church officials. They joined because they had a calling and they believed in God, and that's what they did. They did the best they could. But there were many through all, levels of church society that, well, they enjoyed being in charge, and they enjoyed, the benefits that came from being a member of a really an exalted, class of people, okay? And so we're going to talk about that. All right. What were the major problems? Let's go here. Okay, one of the major problems that started creeping up in the Middle Ages, but it doesn't really, people really don't start chafing at this idea until, the late 1400s, is the idea of the worship of relics, okay? What is a relic? A relic is the supposed piece of a holy person, okay? In Christian teaching and the time, in the Middle Ages, a relic would be the literal body part of, a person that was considered holy, a saint, or a martyr, somebody who died for their cause, whatever it might be. And relics ranged in from a pinky bone all the way up to a skull. Okay, these relics under Catholic thinking and teaching were venerated. that is a no-no in the Bible, but it's something that happened. Whereas you're not supposed to be worshiping relics, you're supposed to be worshiping God. You're supposed to be giving your allegiance, your pledge to Christ. But people, especially in the Middle Ages, and the church really didn't do anything to stop this, is they started focusing on the worship of the relic itself, okay? So what would happen is, somebody would do some digging, they'd find a skeleton, and according to the old, or they'd find a hip bone or something like that, and according to the old prophecies, this is the hip bone of Saint Jude. And then they would take it and they would put it into the local, it would usually go to some bigger church, not just a little parish church, but a bigger church like a cathedral or something like that. And what would happen is people would come, and what always happened with these relics is that there would be tales and stories of healing because of it, okay? And so pilgrims, people on holy travels would come from far and wide to come see it and touch it, okay? Get close to it, So for instance, if here's this old hip bone of St. Jude, who was supposedly martyred by the Romans, 800 years ago. We found his hip bone. We didn't find anything else, we found his hip bone. Well, it's still the hip bone of a saint, and it has healing properties and everything else. So people would come, and all of a sudden, a blind man would see, or a woman who couldn't give birth suddenly, got pregnant, or, whatever. It had healing properties, okay? Well, the church, not to, let a great opportunity go to waste, would put it in a special spot in the church. And if it's an amazing thing and the people are literally coming to see it, well, you don't want to lose that opportunity. So what would the church do? They would, in essence, charge the people. Like, hey, we have this amazing relic. It's kind of off behind this thing. You can see it for the small payment of, a little piece of gold. And people would do it because they wanted to see it. And they wanted to, get healed, whatever was wrong with them. And this created a huge trafficking in relics, okay? And charlatans were going crazy throughout Europe. Some guy would roll into town. He's like, look, I have the thumb bone, St. John the Baptist. And it's amazing. And people are like, oh my gosh, and he'd pay somebody to be healed by touching it or whatever. And then a person wanted to buy it. Well, usually a church would buy it. And then what would happen is they would stick it with the other 6 thumb bones that they have from St. John the Baptist. And they would charge people for the pleasure of seeing it and even touching it and being around it. So they generated a huge amount of revenue by doing this, okay? So in essence, in this way, they've become less of a religious institution, less of a spiritual organization, and more of a what? A business, We have something you want, you can see it, you can be a part of it, but it's going to cost you, okay? It's going to cost you. But also one of the big no-nos is in the Catholic Church at this time is the veneration or worship of 2 different things, is the veneration and worship, more specifically the worship of the saints. Okay, so here we have Saint Sebastian. He's been plugged full of arrows, but he doesn't die because, it's his faith in God. They're like, if I, plug you full of arrows, will you die? Well, only if God wants me to. And so he's filled full of arrows until God finally lets him mercifully die and he goes up to heaven. But he's a saint. But the idea is now all of a sudden people in the Middle Ages and leading up to the Renaissance are worshiping the saint directly, okay? When, whatever. And each of these saints gets a certain thing that they're known for, like there's the patron saint of sailors, or the patron saint of women, or the patron saint of children, or the patron saint of the blind, whatever, right? And so all of a sudden when people need help and they're expected to pray, they're not saying, Heavenly Father, please, help me out here, whatever. They're all of a sudden asking for help to that specific saint. In essence, bypassing God and just worshiping that saint, okay? There are many people at this time that start, whispering themselves like, I don't like this idea, because it's almost heretical thought by the textbook definition. You're not worshiping the right thing. You're worshiping this other thing. It should be respected, and it should be treated as such, as being, amazing piece of this Christian theology, but they shouldn't be worshipped. And the same thing goes for the biggest culprit, and that was the worship of the Virgin Mary herself. Okay, there's an R there. It's just little. It's not Virgin May. The Virgin Mary. This was the biggest one. The Virgin Mary had a huge cult following throughout the Middle Ages, leading up into the Renaissance, and even past that. And that still goes on to this day. The idea is that you don't directly worship Christ, or God. You worship the Virgin herself. And the biggest culprits of this was the Eastern Roman Empire. The Virgin Mary was everywhere in Constantinople before it fell. There was mosaics of her and banners of her, everything, even more so than Jesus himself. And this was once again a big no-no for the Virgin Mary, according to Christian, theology. Should be venerated and should be, given respect, and should be, you can ask, for her good graces, but you're also asking the good graces from God Himself. You're not just bypassing Him and saying, "Virgin Mary, help me out." Okay, so that was the biggest one, biggest problem that was creeping up with these relics and with these worship of the saints. Okay. So that was called the cult of the Virgin. Okay. Moving on. We still have the old problems that we've always had for a long time. The idea of simony. Okay. The idea of offering, high church offices to the highest bidder. So that was still a problem. We had the problem of usury, where you even got churches, parts of the church that were even becoming a bank. So they were doing the very thing that they were arguing against, offering high interest loans. Okay, that's usury, remember? But then another one of the problems that we start seeing with the Catholic Church at this time is the idea of payment when it came to the very things that the church was telling you had to do. Okay, so for instance, when a baby was baptized, it was expected that the baby was baptized. If you were a good Christian family, the baby had to be baptized. There wasn't a oh, should we? It was, you had to get it done. Otherwise, that baby's soul was, damned. That was it. Wasn't a true Christian. Well, only the priest or whoever, the church official, could do the baptism. You couldn't do the baptism, but the church official could. But he wasn't going to do it for free. Okay, he wasn't going to do it for free. It was demanded of you at this time that when you brought the baby in for a baptism, that you would pay. You had to pay them to do it. Okay, and every one of these things, they're called the sacraments. Okay, these sacred ancient customs of the Christian and then Catholic Church, they're all done. Okay, so like when the baby's born and it gets baptized, or when like in Catholicism, when the child has the first communion at a certain age, even on your deathbed, when the priest comes in to offer the last rites, basically absolving you of your sin and asking that you reject Satan and believe in Christ on your deathbed so that you can, go to heaven, it's expected that you pay. What's interesting about this concept is that in many of those sacraments, it's still expected in the modern church. It's not forced anymore, okay? But it's expected. For instance, when our baby was baptized, you're expected to, at a generosity and kindness, to give a tithe, a donation to the church, for the priest to perform this ritual. Okay. Well, once again, in the Middle Ages and moving on to the Renaissance, this was yet another way for the church to make money. Okay. It was. Remember, we're moving away from the church being this spiritual organization, more being this business, okay? And it was making them a ton of money, because think how many babies are being baptized. Think how many people were being, were dying or doing whatever they're doing. And and so the church was making a ton of money at doing all this stuff, okay? In, like I said, in coordination with the relic worship and everything else too, okay? All right, another problem that starts creeping up, and this one is, had been on the minds of people for a long time, but now the printing press really puts this out into the forefront, is the use of Latin. By the time you get to the 1500s, the only people that are using Latin, the only people that have used Latin for a long time, right? We consider Latin, pretty much, a dead language. Nobody runs around, talks, and speaks to each other in Latin anymore. But by the year 1500, the only people using Latin are or have even been trained in Latin are, officials, right? High officials in the city, and the church. Okay. People aren't, a fishmonger, and the carpenter, when they're talking, shop, or they're talking about, haggling over the price of a cart of apples or something like that, aren't sitting there talking to each other in Latin like they're Julius Caesar. But the church kept using it. And so when you went to church, in the year 1485, guess what that priest was sitting there doing the entire sermon in? Latin, okay? Over time, you'd learn certain words, obviously, and you could hear proper names. But basically, the majority of it was in Latin, and the priest was, explaining to you how things were and how you needed to be a good Christian. But he was doing it in Latin. This has always been a disconnect with the church and with the people, because if I don't understand 99% of the stuff you're saying, I have to take your word for it of what you're saying to me and how you're saying it, okay? So if the priest is telling me, you can't do this because the Bible says you can't go home and fact check him. You can't go home and say, well, let me see if that's really what the Bible's saying, because A, you don't have a Bible, and B, even if you did, it would be in what? It would be in Latin, and you don't read Latin, okay? You don't have a Bible in English or German or whatever else. But now with the advent of the printing press in the 1440s, by the time you get to the 1540s, right, like with Vesalius, now that book that I showed you, that's for a higher, set of people, scholars. So they would be reading Latin. But a regular book, it's going to be in the vernacular. It's going to be in your language. Okay, it's going to be in your language. So, like I showed you that one, like English or German or, whatever. It's going to be in a language you can understand as these people slowly start to learn to read and write. Okay, but the continued use of Latin by the Catholic Church at this time really causes a disconnect, more of a disconnect between the people and the church, okay? That crack is opening up wider. It's like people are saying to the church officials, why are you doing this? Why does it have to be in Latin? Why can't you just tell me these things in my language? You speak my language. I know you. Here's this priest. I see him every day. I know he speaks German or whatever it might be. Why can't you do the sermon in Latin or in German so that I can understand it and you can put more emphasis into it or whatever it might be? Are you hiding something, or are you saying something that isn't accurate because I can't check it out? So once again, this is a continued problem of the Catholic Church. Okay. All right, folks. Now we get down to the nitty gritty. All right, moving on. The absolute biggest problem that people started having with the Catholic Church in the 1500s was this word that you've seen before, because it was made great, this problem, and that is the word indulgences, okay? All right, so this guy's name, this is a pope, obviously. His name was Leo. Excuse me. His name was Leo the 10th, okay? I'll give you 3 guesses what great Italian family he belonged to. And they start with an M. It starts with an M. Leo the 10th, the Pope, in the year 1500. He was his good qualities were that he did help the poor, okay? routinely, annually, the church would give away over 10,000 pieces of gold to different charities, okay, to like widows, underneath his leadership of the church at the time, to like widows, war veterans, things like that. And they built a ton of like foundling homes for orphan children. They did a lot of good things. But also on the flip side of that, Leo X, well, he came from a very prominent family, the Medici, and they liked the best. And so he liked the best as well too. And when he was up there, he certainly wasn't going to stop liking the best. He enjoyed the arts, and he paid a pretty penny for a ton of artwork to be done in the Vatican, for new buildings to be built. At one point, he wanted to renovate St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, and that cost a lot of money. He looked in the the papal coffers, and he saw that there wasn't much money left. But there was a way for the church, because they're already getting a ton of money, but there's a way for the church to get even more money, and that was with this thing here. Before we get to that concept, we're going to talk about a different person real quickly, and that's this person. And this person changes everything. Okay, so we have seen how heretics, right, people challenging the power of the Catholic Church, have been dealt with, right, through instruction, torture, all that other good stuff, until might unfortunately lead to their death. But they'd always been taken care of. We even saw there was whole crusades against heretics, not counting the Muslims, but actual Christian heretics. And we see there's actual crusades and everything against them. But they'd always been suppressed, these heretics, these heretical movements. To the biggest degree, they'd been suppressed. And the tiny flame of what they were trying to do, whether they were madmen or martyrs, whichever side you're on, was always snuffed out. It was able to be snuffed out by the church. But now, folks, we're in the Renaissance, right? It's the 1500s, and things are much different than they were with like the Crusades, 300 years earlier. Now, all of a sudden, you have a total switch, right? People are learning, people are understanding more and more and more. The printing presses all around Western Europe are cranking out books all over the place, from everything from travel books to the Bible, okay? Now, all of a sudden, you have more thought, and it's harder to suppress that thought, especially if it's heretical. It's harder to do it because it's like a weed. You pull out one weed, but now all of a sudden there's 50 more. And by the time you get done pulling those out, there's 13 more have popped up over here, and so on. And it starts with this guy, and his name was Martin Luther. Okay, Martin Luther was born in Germany, and he was born to a coppersmith. He hated his parents. They were extremely strict. He writes about how he hated his mother and his father because they would beat him. They would just beat him until he ran bloody red. And they told him from a very early age, you're going to be a lawyer. We don't care what you want to be. We want you to be a lawyer. And they were part of that middle class society in Germany, right? The burgher class, okay, the bourgeois. And they were able to send him off to school. He went off to school as a young man in the University town of Erfurt, and he did what all young men do. He went to school, partied. He went from a little town to all of a sudden this big city, and he was a 19-year-old kid. He was doing his thing, and so the story goes, he was this close to finishing up with law school. He was this close. He was right there, and so the story goes. He was on the road. Had been visiting his parents, and then he was coming back to school, and he gets caught in this giant lightning storm, or whatever, this giant awful storm. And he never specifically says what happens, but he basically tells us that he got thrown off his horse, and he was laying there, and he's ready to die. But then he got up on his knees, and he begs God and Saint Anne. So once again, this kind of worship of saints. Please get me out of this. Please, I don't want to die here. I don't, he'd already seen many of his friends die of the plague, the year earlier, which really put into perspective the whole idea of, life and death. And he basically begged, God, please don't kill me. I have so much else I want to live for, and if you don't kill me, I will devote myself to you. And well, he didn't die. So true to his word, he goes off and he doesn't finish law school at first, and he joins. He becomes a priest. He does school, and he becomes a priest. And his parents are furious, absolutely furious. They disown him, but he doesn't care, and he devotes himself to. He's a monk. Okay, he goes back and he does some more studies with law and everything else. He's a monk, and his one wish is to actually go to the eternal city, and that is Rome, obviously. So in the year 1510, okay, in the year 1510. He takes a pilgrimage to Rome with his one of his good buddies, and this is incredible because he's just been this provincial kid, from the sticks up there in far north Germany. He walks all the way there. Takes him about a month and a half. He makes it to Rome, and Rome is, oh my God, this is incredible! Wow, it's this huge city. It's bustling with people. And the church's influence is everywhere, obviously. There's the cathedrals and papal palaces all over the place. It's just, he's blown away by it. He writes in his journals that, he's just blown away by it. But then, very shortly after that, the shine starts to wear off. And he starts to come to this really tragic conclusion. And he doesn't want to believe it at first, but that the church is more of what we've been talking about, a business, than the spiritual thing. And he starts to get very upset about this. He starts to get very disillusioned with the Pope and with the whole concept. He's like, what am I part of? I dedicated my life to this now, and this is what I'm part of, being a grifter almost. I'm a person who is selling salvation as opposed to offering salvation, right? I'm just, he's in Rome for several months, and he just sees this, that almost every opportunity the church has, they're making money off of people coming. People like him, pilgrims that have come. And he understands that this is the way it is all throughout Europe. He really starts to wake up to this, and he is very, very upset by this. And then the biggest one is what we were talking about, and that is indulgences. Now, we talked about the indulgence was a plenary indulgence. That's something that another pope, 500 years earlier, Pope Urban II, gave to the Crusaders. Remember, he said, if you did something bad in life, that's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but you can be forgiven if you take the cross, you go off to on the Crusades, and you fight for the Holy Land. You'll be forgiven, and you can go back into heaven. You can get back into heaven, since you're kind of, barred from that right now. That's a plenary indulgence. Just a regular old indulgence, it was Leo, and the popes had used this before, but Leo, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Leo sees that he has no more money, so what he does is he sends one of his highest ranking church officials, actually right directly up to Luther's neck of the woods in Germany, and he offers indulgences. What that means is, before he leaves, all of the scribes or whatever of the Pope, they sign these little certificates, and then he blesses them. The Pope blesses them, and they sprinkle holy water and stuff on them, and then he stamps them with the official papal seal. And they stick these little certificates wrapped up in this beautiful little ribbon, and they put them in these big chests. And then this guy, his name is John Tetzel, he goes up and he stops in these towns, and he basically pulls these things out, and he has people line up, and he says, do you need salvation from your sin? Did you commit something terrible? And people step up, what did you do? Well, I cheated on my wife. That's bad news, you shouldn't do that. Yeah, I know. Well, what can you do for me? Well, I've got this little piece of paper that is signed by the Pope, it's blessed by the Pope himself, and basically you can have this, and it will absolve you of of that sin, okay? Even all the other sins that you did, it'll absolve you of that. And it's yours for the small price of $29.95. No, whatever, of some kind of money. He has to pay for it. So people start doing that. This is like I said, the straw that breaks the camel's back when it comes to Martin Luther, because he comes back from Rome in in 1510, 1510, 1511, and this is in 1517. Okay, then we see these indulgences. So he's been sitting there having a crisis of conscience for years now. He doesn't want to stop being in the church, but he realizes that the Catholic Church has gone so far off track compared to where they used to be that he doesn't know if he can be a part of it anymore. He wants to be, but he doesn't know if he can. He's like, wait, what's going on? And this is the thing that finally says no. It makes him say, no, I can't do this anymore. This is not right at all. And because he believes, remember, the idea is that if you sin, what are you supposed to do? You are supposed to go confess your sin to the priest, explain to him why you are penitent, why you didn't mean it, or why you want to ask forgiveness from Christ, and then the priest offers absolution. And it's not a money exchange. The priest offers absolution from through Christ for you, that Christ forgives you, that you have to do penance, you have to pray or fast or do something, but you sure as heck shouldn't, nowhere it says in the Bible, here, give us 10 gold pieces and then you'll be forgiven of murder or something like that. And this is it for Martin Luther. And so what he does is actually on Halloween, October 31st of 1517, he sits down in his little town there and he writes out these things here. And these are called the 95 Theses. And these theses, they're all in Latin, okay, they're basically rebukes against the Catholic Church, okay? He's not just talking about indulgences, he's talking about all the bad things that he sees the Catholic Church is doing. And he writes them up in these points, like bullet points, one after another. He comes up with 95 of them, basically criticizing the church, saying the church has totally lost its way. The church is unlike anything that Christ would have wanted. The church is become this power-hungry, money-grubbing, thing, this specter, almost like it's controlled by the devil. He hates what's happened to the church, and he wants the church to fix its problems. Okay, so what does he do? He takes these theses and he nails them to the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral there in Wittenberg, Germany. Okay, now it's hard to understand exactly what he meant by this because, like I said, the theses are all in Latin. Okay, they're all in Latin. So it's not like the everyday average person is going to walk by and be like, oh yeah, I see what he's writing up here. No, not at all. But the idea is that he's putting them up there for that he's saying, I'm not afraid of what the church might think. Okay, I'm not afraid of what the church or what the church might say. I have to get this off my conscience. I can't sit here anymore and just be a part of this organization that maybe or maybe not has the best wishes of the people, of the souls of the people in mind. And this was nothing new. People, church officials and other officials, it was commonplace for people to go nail things up there on the door for people to talk about and debate and everything else. But this was a direct attack against the big boy, okay, against the church itself, basically saying, I'm not arguing with like another priest down the street or, even like one of my parishioners. I'm arguing with you, Pope. I'm arguing with the church, okay? And this has to stop. Now, Martin Luther at this point in 1517, he is not jumping up and down saying, I want to start a new church and the Catholic Church is evil. Not at all. Okay, not at all. Once again, what he's saying is, I am a devout Catholic. I am a believer in Christ. That's the reason why I joined this whole thing. I want the church to fix itself, and I'll be there to help. I want the church to fix itself. I want the church to go back to the way, now this is interesting because, like I said, he's not a dummy. He's skilled in Greek. He's skilled in Latin. He's been reading this stuff that's been done by the church for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is not a new thing. It just crept up, last summer. This has been happening for a long, long, long time, way before Martin Luther was born. But he's saying we can get back on the right path. We can get the church back to where it should be, to focus on the salvation of souls rather than this business model that's a part of. Okay, and he's not advocating, I'm going to create a new church or something like that. No. But what's pushing this, folks, and what will help us along? Once again, these Renaissance ideas and teachings are going to push us along, but that printing press as well too. Because remember, if you're a heretic and you get your hand on some ink and paper and you're literate and you write about, how the Catholic Church is wrong and it's the year 1400, well, that's it. They're going to confiscate it and burn it, and nobody will ever see it. But now all of a sudden, Martin Luther can get these theses, these rebukes against the church, published, right? And they'll publish as many as he's willing to pay for. And then what happens? Those books get out, those pamphlets get out, and the ideas get out. And slowly it spreads like wildfire. And all these people that had their grudges against the Catholic Church say, hey, here's somebody who's willing to stand up for the same thing that I'm thinking about the Catholic Church. Yeah, okay. So, oh, you think that way too, right? So that cat is out of the bag, okay? We're at a point now in history where you can't just kill that one person, and trust me, they try, and expect that his idea is going to die with him. Even if they had gotten a hold of Martin Luther and they had killed him, his ideas were out there now, okay? So it was inevitable. It just so happened, it was inevitable that it was going to be, that there was going to be change. It just so happened that it was this guy, Martin Luther, that did it, okay? He's the first one to stand up and say no and to show his complaints against the church. Now, being, the rational organization that it was at the time, what do you think the Catholic Church did? Oh, yeah, you're right, absolutely right, Martin Luther, our bad, we shouldn't do this. No, of course not. When Leo hears that, some bumpkin church, priest up in Germany is criticizing him and challenging him, especially on this side of indulgences, what do you think he does? Well, he's upset, to say the least, and he sends his guys out there to talk to Luther, and they do what they've always done with heretics, They don't just arrest him and kill him. They basically say, what is wrong with you? You're a priest. You know how it works. Knock it off. Enough with this nonsense. But he doesn't stop. He keeps saying, he's like, no, I'm not going to go back. Everything I put in there was how I felt. I'm not going to take it back. And they keep trying, like, enough. You're getting, the Pope is mad. He's beyond mad. Enough. Because you're challenging him. You're directly challenging his infallibility. And he says, I don't care. The Catholic Church is corrupt. It's wrong. It's totally what it should not be. And so what does the Pope do? What does Leo do? He threatens him with, the greatest weapon that the Pope's always had, and that was excommunication, right? Literally kicking him out of the church and kicking him out of heaven. And he, even at that point, Luther says, now it's been about 4 years since then, so it's like 1521, and he says, I don't care. You won't rebuild the church. You won't fix these problems. So I'm going to keep talking to other people about why these are major problems. They need to be fixed. He still is not saying, I really need to have a whole new church. Nothing like that. Okay. And the Pope says, fine. He excommunicates him, kicks him out. And then he tells everybody, you are obligated to bring him to me. As a good Christian, I want him. So what happens with Martin Luther? He starts bouncing around Germany, staying one step ahead of church officials. He makes it to, one place, and, a duke or whatever is there, and he hides him and feeds him in one place. Church officials show up, and, he leads them down the wrong road, like, oh, no, oh, yeah, he was here, 3 weeks ago, but I haven't seen him since. Sorry, I didn't know. I would have held on to him for you. Why are these nobles doing this in Germany? Why are they not arresting Martin Luther? Why are they not, bringing him in chains back to the Pope? Well, this is finally their way of getting some what? Payback. This is finally these people's, these counts and these emperors and everything else. It's finally their way of telling the Pope, oh yeah, look at that. Looks like you aren't infallible. Looks like you aren't in charge of everything. You know, the same thing they've been fighting about, right? The kings and the Pope for hundreds and hundreds of years now at this point. You know, who's in charge of my kingdom? Is it you, the Pope in Rome, or is it me, the king, and whatever? And so they finally see their inroad with this guy, and they protect him. And he's never captured. He bounces around. He spends the whole rest of his life proselytizing. He's still a priest, according to him. He's been technically kicked out of the church. He never gets the excommunication lifted. He's always considered excommunicated under the eyes of the church. But he just keeps going. And eventually, folks, the Pope sends officials out, and they know they can't catch him, but they say, look, let's have a debate. Okay, you, Martin Luther, you think you're so great, you think you're so smart, you come and you have a debate, and I'm going to send my, my biggest, scholars, my biggest theologians, and we're going to talk. We're going to have a debate. We're going to have a council, okay, and see once and for all who's right and who's wrong. Is it the Catholic Church or is it you? And his friends are telling him, you're not really going to this thing, right? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to go. And they're like, no, I wouldn't go because this is a trick. They're just going to capture you and kill you. He says, no, if I hide from them and I don't go to this, then it shows once again that they still are in power and that the Pope can just basically bully everybody into believing the way he wants to believe. So he shows up, and where does he show up? We've seen this city's name before and had everything to do with religion then too, and that is a small place in Germany called Worms. Okay, so he shows up in that city. They have the grand debate, and nothing's settled, as we expected not to be. It's not like all of a sudden, he's been feeling this way for years and years and years, that all of a sudden the Catholic, these Catholic, inquisitors are going to suddenly change his mind, and vice versa. These guys are not going to go, you know what, you're right, Martin. The Pope is wrong. But it's a way for both of them to get out, their different viewpoints on these subjects. And they talk about all these different things about like the, humanity of Christ and, the infallibility and the whole indulgence thing. And nothing is settled. Nobody, it's not like there's a panel of jurors there. They go like, yeah, I think they're right. It's just a way for them to talk. But it helps Martin Luther more than the Catholic Church, because once again, here's a man who was willing to stand there and risk all the horrors of torture and execution to say, this is what I think about the corruption of the Catholic Church at this point. I want them to fix, be fixed. I want this to be fixed. Okay, so it happens in the city of Worms, the city of Worms. Okay, but folks, to wrap this up really quickly. Oops, I have a picture of that. Okay. What this causes, once Martin Luther dies, towards the end of his life, he realizes, he's realized this for a long time too, that the Catholic Church is, like that old grandfather clock. It's going to work one way or it's not going to work at all. And he realized that in his lifetime, the Catholic Church, that what he had hoped for, a transformation of the Catholic Church, is not going to happen. But he still keeps proselytizing. He still keeps traveling around. And his words really resonate in his home place in Germany. And, and what happens is we start seeing a defining line between different kingdoms now, based not just on identity, on, the cultural identity, here's a Frenchman, or here's a German, or here's an Englishman, or a Scotsman, or whatever, but now based on religion. And for the first time, this is the first time in European history that this has happened since the time of the Romans, right? Remember the time of the Romans? At the end, you still have the pagans that worship the old Roman gods, but then more and more people are being converted to Christianity. So that's the last time where there's been two different groups of, major groups, not counting the minority groups like the Jews, but two major groups that focus on two different, religions. This is the first time in 1,000 years where now all of a sudden there's a split between that Christianity. Because remember, the East the Greek Orthodox, that was in their own thing with the Eastern Empire, with in the Constantinople and all that. And the Pope really didn't have any power over there. But now all of a sudden, he has power all throughout Western and Central Europe. But now all of a sudden, there's a group of people that are telling the Catholic Church and telling the Pope, look, Martin Luther might not want to do it, or it didn't expressly say it, but we are. If you can't work with us, then we'll just do our own thing. And this movement is called the Reformation, okay? Basically trying to reform the Catholic Church, all the problems that we talked about, reforming the Catholic Church. Well, the Catholic Church is not going to go down without a fight. They've been top dog for a long, long time, and then all of a sudden just acquiesce and say, okay, you know what, you're right. We'll just change everything about ourselves. No, they don't. They just keep fighting about it. And Martin Luther's ideas start to coalesce into their own Christian movement, and that is called Protestantism. Protestantism. The very word itself, protest, is in that word, Protestantism. And this is the first time, folks. So in the 1500s onward, we start to see a branching out of Christianity. Remember, for 1,000 years, there's only been one game in town, Catholicism. But now all of a sudden in the 1500s onward, we start seeing a branching out. So from Protestantism, we start to see specific things start to happen. As people start to rationalize their own ideas about God, they're reading the Bible in their own language. They're starting to think about things without the context of a priest or a pope there. And we see, even like Lutheranism, okay, based off of Martin Luther, his teachings. And then we see other ones, two other offshoots, Baptists, Calvinists, based off of teachings of others that come after Martin Luther that say the same thing. They're challenging the might of the Catholic Church. And this is it for the Catholic Church. What I mean by that is not all of a sudden the Catholic Church falls apart. Not at all. It's now forever transformed. It's going to spend the next couple centuries fighting these various groups. Instead of really working with them, but fighting them, basically trying to bring them back in the fold. But that cannot happen, folks. That cannot happen, right? Religion is a very, very powerful thing when it comes to some people's lives. And so, you can't just say, you're going to believe this way. For 1,000 years, the church did just that. But now that you have this new society of ideas and thinking and everything else, it's just not going to happen. And unfortunately, what does this start? This starts almost 200 years of religious wars. Okay. Now we've had religious wars before, but it's been right the Crusades with the fights of the Christians against the Muslims, right, in the Holy Land, or against heretics back home. But now all of a sudden, it's religious wars in the context of one group of Christians versus another group of Christians. They're going to kill each other based off of, you have one interpretation of Christ, I have a different interpretation of Christ. You believe in one thing, I believe in this thing. And they're going to kill each other and try and prove to one another, the way I believe in God is the right way. No, the way I believe in God is the right way. And they're going to slaughter each other over it, okay? This starts largely in, they realize at some point that all this fighting is terrible. Oops. And so in 1555, ran out of room, so I'll put some Latin up here for you. Whoops. Okay. In 1555, they come together, these warring powers, like from France and Germany and everything else, and they say, look, this is getting us nowhere. Let's sign a peace treaty and let's try and figure out this whole thing, because we know that Lutherans are going to do their thing and Protestants are going to do their thing and Catholics are going to do their thing. And some people are okay with that. Like, well, I don't like you, you Protestant, because I'm a Catholic, but whatever. I'm not going to get anywhere with just killing you. And same thing, vice versa. And so the Peace of Augsburg, they come up with this. We look at it and we say, that's what they came up with. That's the best thing they could come up with. But at their time, this was actually a very progressive way of thinking. And what they did was, in Latin, the term is called eius regio, okay, E-I-U-S, R-E-G-I-O, cuius, or cuius, religio, okay, C-U-I-U-S. What this means is, my region, my religion, okay? So this was the best they can come up with. Basically, in a nutshell, it was saying, let's say you live in this, I don't know, the dukedom of Bavaria or something. That duke, if he's a Protestant, guess what you are? Because he's in charge, he's the noble. Well, you're a Protestant too. But wait, I'm a Catholic. No, not if you want to live here. So instead of just killing you, they basically give you a timetable. Okay, well, you've got two choices. You can either convert and be a good Protestant and reject the teachings of the Pope and the Catholic Church, or you can get out, okay? You can get out, pack up your stuff and leave and go to some other place. So basically, so like for instance, in a, when I showed you the map of the Holy Roman Empire there, Germany, there's little places all over the place. It's not just one big kingdom. There's little places all over the place. So it could be that here is the Duke of Bavaria or whatever, and he's a Protestant, but you go 20 miles to where his lands end, and now there's the county of, I don't know, Thurenberg or something like that, and that guy, the count, is Catholic. You could go over there if you're Catholic and live there. Well, once again, this is a very progressive way of dealing with this problem instead of just slaughtering each other. And it works for a short period of time. But it's, as we would imagine, it's very impractical, okay? You can't just move entire populations of people and say, well, no, you're not our religion, so you got to go somewhere else. It's not feasible. The vast majority of people can't just pack up their stuff. They've lived there for forever, generations, and just go move somewhere else. And so it doesn't work. So these people keep their religions and they stay in place. They stay where they are. And what this does, unfortunately, is leads to what you see up there on the board, and that is the what's called the 30 Years' War. Okay, 30 Years' War begins in the year 1618, and for 30 years on the nose until 1648. There's that number again. Every kingdom, every major kingdom in Europe, France, Germany, even like Sweden, all these newer ones that are popping up, they're all involved and they're all killing each other. And what are they killing each other about? The underlying cause is religion, okay? Catholics versus Protestants, Protestants versus Catholics. But for the first time in history, we see a melding of politics with religion, okay? When it comes to warfare. Not only are they killing each other because of religious strife, that's the underlying basis, that's the main problem. But there are also these kings, right, that now are getting to the point of absolute power, right? The nobles have power, but the kings have power. They're starting to see that this is a good way for them to use religion as a method of gaining what? More power. For who? For themselves. Okay? It just depends on which side you're on. If you're a Protestant, and the vast majority of Protestant countries came from Central Europe, so like you had Germany, and then you had like the Norwegian countries, the Scandinavian countries like Kingdom of Norway, Kingdom of Sweden, versus the Catholic countries like France, Spain. But not just the country itself, but these different ruling families in these countries, okay? It's a way for you to challenge the supremacy of the Pope or of these, groups who you consider heretical if you're Catholic. But it's also a way for your king or your queen or your princess or your duke or whatever it might be to gain more power, okay? The religious aspect is just a convenient byproduct. It's also a way for you to consolidate more power. So like if your neighbor is Protestant, you're Catholic, you're invading his territory and you're, causing horrible depredations of the population and doing all this terrible stuff. But what's the point? Are you doing it just because you want to save the souls of all the people there? No. You're doing it because now, what have you just taken? You've taken a giant chunk of land from him, and now that land is yours, and everything on it is yours. Imagine that, right? So this is a way for politics and religion to meld, okay? When Urban II called the crusade, the First Crusade, it truly was about religion. It was a fight between, what they believed was the only true church on earth, the true faith, to fight against, the Muslim hordes, right? Politics followed in its footsteps, but the emphasis was on religion. With the 30 Years' War, the emphasis is still religion, but it's also now showing that Europe has put on its big boy pants. And Europe has now consolidated itself into these distinct identities, right? France, England, Spain, Germany, Norway, the Netherlands, whatever it might be. And they're going to fight each other for power. They're going to fight each other for influence. They're going to fight each other for land. We've talked about that because there's not that much of it in Europe that isn't already taken. And the stuff that's been taken, you want it. But they're going to fight each other for this. And they're going to use religion as a happy excuse, okay? The 30 Years' War is a very, very, very terrible, all wars are terrible, but 30 Years' War is very, very terrible. It's largely fought. There's no such thing as standing armies still, okay? So you have, your army, but then to offset the discrepancy in numbers, you hire mercenaries. So this is the war for mercenaries. Mercenaries literally change sides because mercenaries only fight for one thing, and that's money. So all of a sudden, if a Catholic duke hires them, they'll be on that side and do horrible things. And then, once that contract's up, they go get signed by a Protestant group, king, and do the same thing, just on the other side, okay? 30 Years' War takes place mostly in Central Europe, specifically in Germany. And this is a time before the rules of war. There's still knights and stuff running around, but the knights, remember, are only really focused on each other as a gentleman. Who suffers the most? The same people always suffer in war. Civilians, just regular people. It's estimated, we'll never truly know, but it's estimated that over 40% of the population in Germany at the time, a couple million people in 30 years span, they die. They're either they die from starvation, literally getting burned out of their village. Like here, you're a Protestant village and here comes a Catholic army. And the Catholic army does all these horrible things to the population, looking for gold and just killing people. And then once they've taken the animals that they want and killed the rest and done committed horrible atrocities against the population, they take off. Well, here comes a Protestant army. Well, but remember, it's usually just a bunch of mercenaries. The mercenaries don't care if you're Protestant or Catholic or Jew or whatever it might be. Muslim, they don't care. They care about money. So they do all the same stuff to you that last army just did. They're torturing people. Where's your money? Where's your gold? Everything else. And over time, over 40% of the population in Germany gets wiped out. It's just a very, very terrible war, and it lasts for 30 years. They sign little peace treaties here that last a couple months, then they fight each other, and so on. And like I said, all major European powers at this time join up. And folks, that is the culmination of this class. We started out at the very beginning talking about how civilization even started, right? How did people finally come together and start doing these things that we just experience on a daily basis? How did they gain certain jobs? How did they start worshiping certain gods? How did they start picking their leaders? You know, so on. How do they fight each other? We've talked about different special people throughout history. Those real movers and shakers throughout history that led by sheer force of will and charisma and everything else. And usually whatever they built fell apart afterwards. We talked about identity, how the identity of Europe, was its own thing, and then it starts to coalesce into these more specific identities of what we see on the map today. Being a Frenchman or a Swiss or Italian or whatever it might be. We talked about the rise of finally a little bit the earliest stages of representational government, right? That fight between civic duty versus personal freedoms. But for the very beginning stages of representational freedom, we talked about the power of the church, how it rose, and finally we start to see some pushback against it after 1,000 years. We've talked about a ton of stuff, folks, going all the way from the Greeks and the Romans' ancient civilization all the way up to this point in 1648, when the modern Europe is right on the cusp. Okay, by the time we get to we're in the 1600s. We start talking about the scientific revolution, and once again the offspring of the Renaissance, and then we start getting into the Enlightenment in the 18th century, and moving onward. But that is it for this class, folks. That is it. So I certainly hope that you have enjoyed this. Like I said, I wish we could be in class. I live for these classes. I love talking to you guys and answering your questions, like I said, but that's how it was this semester. So hope and pray for better things next semester. And hopefully I will see you on campus. And if you have any other questions, or you just want to shoot the breeze, or recommend a good book, or if you want me to recommend a good book or something like that, I will be more than happy to do that. If you just want to talk about history, totally fine. I'll talk about history till you're totally sick of hearing me talk about history. And there we go, folks. Thank you for attending my class, and thank you for being here. And I certainly hope that even though you didn't, most of you said you weren't going to be historians, that you found a little bit more appreciation for history, where we've come from, and it helps us understand maybe where we're going and into the future. Okay, all right, folks, take it easy, and I will talk to you later. Ciao.